Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Change on the Run podcast, where we discuss common change challenges and ways to address them when we're short of time. And I'm your host, Phil Buckley. Today's topic is leveraging your existing culture. An organization's culture describes how work gets done. It's a collection of attitudes, beliefs, practices, and behaviors that dictate how people treat each other. It's also a source of strength you can tap into because it's familiar, deeply rooted, and has emotional connections with everyone. So, how do you leverage your existing culture and its strengths to adopt new ways of working? And my guest today is Sarah Smith. Sarah, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Phil.
Thank you for taking the time. And Sarah has over 25 years of learning and leading global change and transformation with private and public organizations in energy, healthcare, hospitality, research, and manufacturing. She's passionate about change both personally and professionally and loves to mix academia, research, and context to find pragmatic approaches that works for each unique situation. Currently head of culture and talent strategy on Team 100, a business transformation consultancy, she's partnering with leaders and HR teams on shaping, strengthening, and scaling culture, including supporting teams to lead themselves and others through change. So, Sarah, what's been your experience with leveraging existing cultures to enable people to change?
So thank you for the introduction. I'm feeling a little older already with my 25 years of experience, but as we've been talking, it is all about experience. And I think the passion and excitement I have for the topic of change, transformation, culture all comes through that experience. And as you said, it's a blend of personal and professional experience. I don't think there's a separation anymore. I don't think I've ever had that in my life, being a mother and a wife and a corporate professional. I'm really excited to talk to you today about what I think is a bit of a chicken and egg scenario as it comes to culture and change. The reason I say chicken and egg is that all change is cultural change because people are at the core of it. And whenever people are at the core of it, it involves behavior, which is culture, the way we behave with one another. So if you pause and think about that for a minute, it's really, really fascinating that if you have to leverage the current culture to help people change, which means inevitably is going to involve behavioral change. How do you do that? And for me, when we talk to leaders and organizations and even my kids, it's carefully, it's slowly, it's intentionally, it's getting the right people involved, the right people engaged, the right people equipped. And it's putting a plan together of how we're going to work as a team to get through this. But ultimately, your question is already the answer. The right thing to do is to always look at your current culture and how you can build on it as a foundation.
It's so interesting that you say that every element of change has a cultural element to it. A lot of leaders I find when they're setting their vision and they're transforming and we're going in this huge direction and here's our North Star, they believe that everything needs to change to get a different outcome. And they don't go to where their culture is. It's almost throwing out what we do now. What's the issue with that? Or is it an issue where it's, no, we're just going to change everything and that's our path to the future?
There's quite a few things to unpick there. But yeah, this whole new versus old, this whole innovation and evolution versus revolution is fascinating to me, that as human beings, we love to create the new. And it's almost like as leaders, when you put that North Star out there and we're running everybody to it, we forget that as we start to talk about it and the excitement we have on it, and that we planned it and we talked about it. We brought all of these other leaders in on that conversation. And then we suddenly turn around to the rest of our organization and say, isn't it exciting? We're going to this new destination and we've packed our whole new bags and we're going to change the way that we all behave. Like, who's excited? And then they turn around and nobody's there. Part of it is that we forget, we spend weeks and months preparing for the change coming. And then when we turn around and start to talk about it, we're not giving people time to process. We're not giving them time to think about our current strengths and how we can lean into that change. Another one is based on the hierarchy of organizations and who's normally controlling the change. I really don't think we're bringing enough empathy to that scenario either. The words as is to be that we use in change are really important. They're not from to, they're not right, wrong, they're not black, white. They're what is our current state of culture? What is the as is? Where are we strong? And like you said, organizations need to understand better, where are we strong today, given our current position, but given our future destination. And if we can have those conversations first, if we can involve our employees and our organizations and our teams first in that conversation of, great, new North Star, this is the direction we're going in. So what have we already got in our toolkit that we're really good at that's going to help us get there? Remember that they're there, reinforce them, use them first. What are we doing now? We're building trust. We're engaging and involving the team. We're not getting too scary too fast. Then we can start to say, okay, but by the way, this new destination is a little different from where we've been before. It is going to involve new ways of working, thinking, behaving. Let's talk about that. But yes, you're right. All too often we want the shiny, the new, we're excited about it, and we jump straight in. I think most people have a change curve of some form or a change process. And I feel like we start on step one and then we have leaders who jump to the end state and miss a gazillion steps in the middle just from excitement. It's not malintent. It probably is just from the excitement of the new.
I find generally most people say change takes time, but when you start getting into culture, then everyone will nod their head and say, absolutely, culture takes time and we need it changed in 6 weeks, which totally goes against what we know to be true about these deep-rooted beliefs and mindsets and behaviors. But there's an impatience, and they might intellectually get it, but there's absolutely no practical appreciation of what's involved. Has that been in your experience? What's going on there?
In my experience, do we see leaders pushing for pace when it comes to changing culture? You can hear it in my voice with that sort of high tone excitement. Yes, they do. In fact, I'm thinking of a large energy company we're working with at the moment. Obviously in that sector, mass scale change, acceleration into the energy transition that you see going on, strategic pivots, mergers and acquisitions, large scale change and transformation of organizations occurring. You sit down and talk about the role of culture in all of this, and the way we think and behave and act, the way leaders behave, the way we're structured. We think about the way we manage people, reward and recognize people, and develop people. And then I think of the accelerators of culture in our world around the way we communicate and the way we adapt and change. And I think that's critical. Again, if all change is cultural change, for me, when you look at the culture of an organization, its own ability to adapt and change is a key accelerator. It's an ability it needs to have. And so when we have leaders coming to us talking about pace, setting programs in order for culture, the first thing we clear out is that this is not an end destination. This is going to be continual. And when you look at the continuous nature of it, it can blow their minds a little. So what we've done is try to work to put together a structure of intentional levers that you can pull in your organization that will help you start to shape, shift, strengthen whatever your need is for your culture, but predominantly strengthen that culture. I think it's okay. We talk about pace, we talk about journey, we talk about continual, and we bring it up common and often.
Certainly. You talked about organizational agility as almost like a cultural characteristic that informs and helps change. Are there any other cultural attributes or strong cultural behaviors that enables culture change?
I saw a really interesting article recently. Somebody had posted about observations to make in a Zoom meeting. And it's spot on, right? One of the other tough questions we often get is, how do you measure culture? And where's that business metric that you put in place? I always feel like we have to disappoint those leaders again, like we did about pace, and go, okay, we can give you measurement, but it's observation. And they're like, what do you mean it's observation? Well, we're observing things, whether I'm in that Zoom meeting, whether I'm attending your board, whether I'm coming in and facilitating a workshop with your crew, or I'm just spending a day in the life. And yeah, it's those observations you're talking about, Phil, like our ability to adapt and change, how we respond to change when it occurs, the conversations people are having about change, and is it fearful or is it excitement, like we were talking earlier, how we communicate, how we're communicating with each other. Is it open? Is it honest? Is it inquisitive? Is it curious? How we communicate can also mean, are we giving and receiving feedback regularly? Are we giving and receiving recognition regularly? You want to increase that pace in change and transformation, and there's a lever you want to pull on a lot. The other ones I would think about are very, very visible, and a lot of discussion on how leaders behave, how they behave in the formal settings. Think of the town halls, the communications, the things they say, but how do they behave in the informal, in those small moments, the way they're presenting themselves? What are they role modeling? How are they behaving? What's important and gets prioritized? Those are the types of observations you can make about leaders as well.
Certainly. And sometimes the culture, the true culture, shadow culture, or what really happens is different than what's on the walls or how leaders say everyone should behave. How do you manage that environment where you've got the published view of a culture, then you get a little bit deeper and you do your diagnostic work and you find that it's really, really different? There's so many studies that say leaders think this and their teams think this, and there's some sort of a delta there. How do you close that gap?
This is where the rubber hits the road for me. And I think it's the most interesting piece of when we work with organizations, by the way, whether they're 100 or whether they're 55,000. Culture is not about the slogans on the mug or the values on the wall. It's about the way that we treat each other when nobody is looking. And the formal aspects, the things that are visible, the things we write down, the policies, the procedures, the job descriptions, the definitions of leadership, the external branding that we are used to attract talent is great. But you better have a narrow say-do gap when it comes to the informality, the reality of what it feels like when you to live in that team every single day. Often we see, especially during transformation and change, if we're changing the direction, that vision where we're going, or the purpose, it's going to involve some form of strategic change. Well, that's going to involve some form of cultural change in the way that we need to behave around here. The minute that occurs, you've created a say-do gap. Policies, processes, things inside your organization, formally written down, formally on walls, are going to change. You're going to have a new set of expectations, the way people behave. And then how quickly you can narrow that say-do gap is really important. And for me, you can disagree or agree with this, Phil, but I think you're with me. The most visible element of that is always going to be the leaders.
Absolutely.
The number one thing that I hear is that, we're going through a cultural transformation. We're saying we want more openness and honesty, and we need that as an organization to provide the innovation that we're looking to do in this new space. Yeah, I just saw that Joe promoted Bob into the role, and we all know that they're ex-friends and they use their position as power. Knowledge is power to them, not open, honest transparency. So there's an example of say-do gap. The formal written down definition of who we are and how we behave doesn't match the behavior that I've just seen from some of our most visible leaders.
Yes, so true. I've seen that as well. And there's a clear gap and everyone knows it because everyone's smart and everyone's watching for these indications. You explain it to a leader and she or he actually calls themselves on their behavior. As part of that cultural change, they open up and say, I'm conscious that some of my behaviors have not been aligned on where we're going. I need your help to keep me honest. And if you have, what impact does that have?
I mean, that's gold dust.
Oh, isn't it gold dust? I know.
You made me think of a leader I worked with in a private organization, so family run, and looking at cultural change from the perspective of a lot of acquisition over the years, a geographically dispersed team, but not necessarily a global team as far as the way that they work, the way that they behaved, both from a formal and an informal perspective. And I was working with a leader who was highly visible and known for the more traditional familial ways of behaving. And over time, holding up the mirror, giving feedback, there's that word again, making sure that we're brave enough to give that feedback, to leverage the existing culture, to highlight the strengths of the current culture. And where I can see that supporting that leader in their delivery was first, but then really using the feedback to highlight where it's not serving them going in the new direction was second. I think holding up the mirror is really important. I was taught you point the finger, then the thumb before you point the finger. Like, what do I own? What can I do? How can I role model this? And this leader standing up in front of groups, starting to say, I'm starting to have moments of revelation. I'm starting to actually observe people around me and starting to see the way my behavior is affecting others is worrying me. So please tell me, please give me feedback, please share with me. Those are the kind of moments that, like we said, they're gold dust. I mean, the minute that human being sees the response of the other human beings around them and you create a stronger connection and they start to give positive affirmation as well as the constructive feedback they need, that's when you start to see that change start to happen. But that's why I think it's so important to leverage the current culture first before you start to transition into the future, is you've got to build trust between those types of leaders. You can't just go in there and go, okay, I'm sorry, what got you here isn't going to get you there. So are you coming or not?
It just doesn't work. And you talk about getting the right stakeholders involved in co-creation. And could you speak more about that? Because it's such an important element, I think, of change or culture, but I'd love your perspectives on it.
For me, the co-creation element of change, transformation, and cultural change is so critical, because when you think about the players that need to be involved in a company, when you say culture, people will go, oh, HR. Let's play buzzword bingo for a minute. And then people say culture to me, and I go, no, leader led. And then they go, oh, okay, well, then what's HR's role? And then you go, okay, HR's role is to support and facilitate that. They say, oh, well, isn't it about communications? And I go, yeah, but they're leader led. And they go, well, isn't it again about the values on the walls and the stories we tell and the words on the mugs? And I go, okay, only as long as those leaders are actually narrowing their say-do gap. So I think there's this magic combo of leaders, HR, and communications immediately. Just as a baseline of how they play together, how they collaborate, what does that relationship look like in an organization is another place where you can look immediately to leverage the current culture. And the piece that then sits in the middle of all of that is it's employee driven. Of course it is. Even if you have 8,000 leaders in a 60,000 people company, yes, the leaders are going to set expectations. They're going to set the pace of change in your organization. Your culture is only ever going to be as good as the worst behavior you're willing to accept from your highest leaders. And I say plural. Yeah, I love people like to put it right at the top of the tree, but it's plural, right? So of course the leaders have a role to play, but there's a lot to be said for middle out too. I really believe in top down, middle out, bottom up. You've got to work change and culture on all axes. And so the middle out, bottom up is, I've still got over 50,000 employees that can truly set the pace. And so, you work with them too.
That's great. And you talk about the triad and how important it is with HR, comms, leaders all playing together and hopefully on the same page. And that leads me to thinking about the importance of expectations, even among those three, but then more broadly through the whole organization. How do you align expectations on this whole transition of identifying our strengths, where the journey's going, what roles each group plays from the middle manager to bottom to top?
If I think about expectation management through culture and change, I'm not a big change process follower. I love academics. I love reading and research, but I love then taking different approaches, different thought processes and putting them in context of the business or the team that we're working with. So do I read them? Yes. Do I follow them verbatim? No. The stakeholder analysis bit, the stakeholder impact bit, I get that. And how do you get the right group of stakeholders together for each of them to say, this is what I see, this is the change that I see occurring, this is what I think it's going to mean for me and the people around me, and this is the role that I think I play. Getting them together early, getting them together openly and honestly, and having an alignment conversation early on is really important.
Thank you. And it's funny when someone said, how do you know what people think? And to your point about we can get so process driven or theoretical, I said, well, why don't we ask them? And it seems so simple, but it seems so complex. There's got to be a harder way than just really asking people what they think and what they value and where they're at now. How do you reward people for being engaged in this whole process?
How we reward and recognize people is one of the 6 levers that we see when you look at culture, right? So when you come into an organization, what's fascinating to me still, and I've just seen it in a very, very small company we're working with, middle-sized and a large, I think when change starts to occur and we're making pivots, and so we're heavy, heads down, like you said, trying to work it out, trying to figure out what's right to do. We're forgetting to put our heads up and actually seeing the progress that we're already making. Those small wins, those small steps, they're all progress. And it's not always by the people that you're necessarily sitting next to or think. So recognition is massive and we lose it. I'm always amazed as human beings, and maybe it's as a parent, it's all about positive affirmation. And, we learned that from Dr. Spot way, way long ago. It's don't critique, but positive reaffirmation. And I think I bring that into the workplace in whatever we do. And people are always surprised by it. Maybe it's because I'm a Brit again. That whole British culture, one doesn't give feedback, but one also doesn't boost other people's egos. We don't need to do that. That's not done. But recognition is massive. We lose it when we go through change and transformation. That's what I've seen 9 times out of 10. So you do need to boost that. You're quite right. You boost it as a culture. The number one thing that I found positive is everybody knows how to do recognition. It's almost like it's got lost in the bandwidth, or we don't have permission to do it, or we're worried we don't have permission to do it, or we're not sure if we're the one that's going to do it. Surely somebody else higher up will do it. There's this wonderful conversation that occurs where we go, well, why can't you send that email? Or why can't you give shout outs at the end of your weekly team meeting? Why can't you write a card because somebody really stepped up and jumped in with another team to get the job done? And then more formally, why can't we have a recognition program that's aligned to our values? Why can't we allow peers to recognize each other and collect them and make them visible? Some of the best programs I've seen are the simplest. I've visited people's desks and you can see the number of cards that they've got around them and the thank yous and the recognition. Tie it to the values and behaviors though. Make it specific, make it consistent, make it regular, make it real. Those are all things that you can do, but make it visible too. Storytelling relates to recognition. It's one of the best ways you can truly create momentum in an organization when you're looking to change process and systems, when you're looking to change culture. We've got to tell those stories. And they're positive stories of progress, no matter how big and small, but they're also stories of lessons learned. Like, we also tried this. This is the response we saw. This is the feedback we heard from our organization. And these are the lessons learned. What do you think? That storytelling element, I think, ties really nicely to recognition. It is a form of recognition for those involved in the stories.
And one thing you said that struck a chord for me about the lessons learned, which is cultural as well. I've heard one CEO say, well, we don't fail here. If you fail, you're not here. Like, this is an area I struggle with to help leaders do, because again, it's that learning and knowing gap. Yes, intuitively, if we looked at our mistakes, if we could expose them and learn our lessons, and then we won't make them again, but perhaps it's attached to the rewards that we have. We're not going to stand up and say, I made this huge mistake and let's dissect it to see where I went wrong, or at least that's my experience.
You see it a lot, right? The fear of failure, the wish to appear perfect in our organizations. The more traditional types of culture we have, the more hierarchical organizations we have, the more you will often see this, right? But you want to talk about leveraging your current culture. I think I learned this in a manufacturing organization I work with. Lean into the current culture. A lot of these traditional, hierarchical, structured, older organizations will somewhere within them have either manufacturing lean processes, or they will have continual improvement. And by the way, all of them will have a safety wing. Dig into those and start to look at how you learn from failure. Root cause analysis. How do you prevent failures from occurring from a safety perspective when human lives are at risk? It means you have a reporting system, your RIRs. You encourage organizations and people to report small moments, small errors that we know will lead to larger errors, but you encourage them to share these small errors often and early to stop the bigger ones. Well, we'll do it when human life is at risk, but maybe not so much when it's about, culture and behaviors. But leverage the current culture. These are highly disciplined parts of organizations that you can bring to leadership, speak their language, and show, okay, these are evidence-based results that show why you need to actually start to sharing a little bit more on the failures. But I think that's the important thing, is to scale them. It's not go out and tell, the worst mistake you ever made as a leader in your career, but it's the smaller moments. And the more you do those little moments over time, the more authentic and real you become to people. And the more they realize you're not perfect, and you're not perfect.
We've talked about so many advantages and benefits of starting with the strengths of our existing culture. And I love that whole co-creation of go to the health and safety or look at the lean team, because we're doing these things in manufacturing or design thinking, whatever department it is, and start from there. Are there any risks involved in leveraging the existing or the good or the important attributes that line up with the future? Are there any risks if you do take that approach that you'd like to share with the listeners?
I think the only risk of leveraging your current culture is allowing people to stay there or get stuck there too long. But I actually don't think that I would consider that a risk. I think that's part of the balancing act. That's part of the dance that you do when it comes to change. That if you're building trust, if you're listening to organization, if you're leveraging the current strengths inside their culture, the first conversation is, tell me where you're strong, based on the strategy, based on the vision and where we're going, tell me where you're strong. The second part of that conversation is always, now tell me where do you think you have opportunities to develop? So I don't think there's too much of a risk. From the get-go, you're talking about both. I'll be honest, the risk that most companies have is that they still go too far to the right too fast. They're not leveraging the current. They forget it's all about the new. It's all about the future. So no, it's not something that I think that actually has a lot of risk in it. I think the risk comes that you're constantly going back to the strengths. I think as human beings, and especially players like myself as external partners, your L&D department, the leaders in the organization, everybody's going to lean into helping you do the new. We just naturally do that. So you get overemphasis on the new, which again makes me feel like you're telling me that I'm doing something wrong. I have to learn all these new skills. I think the risk is actually not leveraging the current enough.
Fascinating. And just this came to mind in a merger environment, two organizations coming together and the acquiring company not acknowledging the strengths of the company being acquired. 12 months later, there's no integration. The business case was not realized. There's resistance. And it is that, come over to us because we're great because we've bought you versus, hey, how can we meld the two? Does that make sense to you? Or have you ever seen anything like that happen?
Early on in my career, I was with the organization for almost 19 years. And one of the things we did a lot was mergers and acquisitions. And then later on in my career, I was involved in a divestiture. And I think these are really, really critical moments when you look at culture. A current client right now had gone through merger disposition over a number of years. And without that intentionality that you're describing, without actually having culture as part of the M&A pre-activity, we didn't look at it as a risk or an area to be assessed. And so it was never addressed. So go back to the way we behave around here can create an us and them just in itself, right? The experiences we've had, the way we've been taught, the way we've been developed, we will behave differently as two different organizations coming together. Then you remember that you then have to align all of those processes and systems beneath that to really allow employees and leaders to experience those behaviors. Then you put those two organizations together without assessing, creating a gap analysis and doing a plan to say, how are we going to do this? Yeah, you're walking into trouble. And this is where, without that intentionality, many cultures become split. You could call them split personalities. Many cultures end up with the macro and the micros and the little moments. Many cultures you can look at, and I saw this recently with an organization, you would ask the leaders where they originally came from, almost which side of the fence, right? And then you could see that culture pervasively going down into the organization. So I don't think it's ever too late. I mean, I was part of an organization where we merged 100 people in. We had those conversations, we addressed them, we looked at them. Obviously, you're going to take some of the positive, but when you're the smaller to the larger, it's harder to do. And the one we're working with at the moment, it's 4 or 5 years later. Yes, it makes it hard. Yes, you've then got a really strong us and them, but you still need a collaborative organization. You still need to work together on these things. That's another moment of creating a strong foundation, facilitating opportunities to allow the leaders to hear each other, to understand how they've come to these differences and the experiences they've had. And then how do you create joint experiences that are going to help them forge the new culture and values and behaviors moving forwards? It's not easy, but it's doable.
It's a beautiful roadmap. A lot of it, I think, as we started talking, it's about relationships, and you just can't do that on a spreadsheet. And we talked about pace and speed. Often the time is of the essence. And I'm just wondering, in the spirit of change on the run, you're going in, let's say, as a scenario into a new client or going back into an existing client. What's that one thing that you would do, that 80-20, you're thrown in and you don't have time to do everything? What would you do?
I'd be really rich if I knew the answer to that, number one.
And I'd borrow your answer and I'd be really rich for using it.
I love it. It's what's the quick fix to change and cultural change.
Yes.
I think we've talked about it a lot today and it's come up in every conversation. The 80% is go find the right leaders. And it's not always the top, right? It's the influential, it's the visible, it's a diverse group of leaders that are actually going to help create the momentum. They're the leaders that, even if they don't know the vision yet, once they start to hear it, you see the engagement and the excitement. So you have to create this quorum. They're the ones who'll create the movement. They're the ones who'll create the momentum. So I don't know if you ever saw it. There's a favorite video of mine, The First Follower, the guy dancing on the hill.
Oh, I love it. Yes, certainly.
It went viral and so many people in change or cultural people know it now, but it is that. Go find your first followers. And how you do that, you have to get the message out. You have to make sure you're allowing people to put their hands up and engage themselves and volunteer in. It's my 80%. If you had to, go find the right leaders.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. And as we close off the show today, do you have an insight or a consideration, a tip, a watch out, anything that we've talked about or anything in addition that you could leave with the listeners as one thing to consider for their changes in their cultures?
We talked about it earlier, Phil. I think the thing for me that I would leave everybody with is that this is not a one man or woman show. It's not a one person show. There is so much change and transformation going on in the world today, in organizations today, in your life today. Don't do it solo. It's a team sport, and it should be. How do we take down the ego and go, yeah, I don't know it all, and I can't possibly know it all in a subject so deep and so rich and so interesting. So let's play together and have more fun. If we did that, if we could have more fun through change, maybe that's the 80%, Bill. If we could have more fun through change, if we could actually smile and have teams that want to work together, couldn't we do a lot more? More collaboration, less competition. That's my last thought for the day.
I love it. And that is cultural in itself. Sometimes our preconceived notions of it has to hurt and it's going to be bad. And it leads us to competition and fear and the attributes that go with it. I love it. Thank you so much. And how can people get in contact with you, Sarah? What's the best way for them to connect?
I'm open to any form of communication because, like we just said, I love to learn and I love to connect with other people. You can find me on LinkedIn, Sarah Elsie Smith. You could use my email address, Sarah, S-A-R-A-H, @100brands.com. And I would love to hear from you.
Sounds like a great invitation. Thank you so much. And thank you for sharing your perspectives and being on today. It's been great. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Phil.
And to the listeners, thank you so much for being here and listening. And as a suggestion, if there's anything that you heard that Sarah said that resonates with you, why not write it down, share it with a friend, and think about how you could put it into practice. And until the next time, I wish you all the best as you continue to lead change.